Jayant Sinha ji, I must place on record my deep appreciation. I've had the pleasure of being a member of parliament with you. When you were a minister in various ministries, civil aviation, finance, I've had deep interactions with you. I must tell you, people, one of the most hardworking ministers and one of the most dedicated ministers. Really, really, it was a pleasure to watch him in parliament. So, with these words, I begin. Respected Sri Jayant Sinha ji, distinguished guests, members, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the media. I have great pleasure in extending a hearty and cordial welcome to all of you to this webinar on building a resilient India this evening. We are grateful to Sri Sinha ji, formerly the Minister of State for Finance and the Minister of State for Civil Aviation in the Government of India, for kindly agreeing to address and interact with us this evening. He is currently the chairperson for Standing Committee on Finance, Government of India. And sir, please correct me, you are also a member of the Public Accounts Committee, right?
That is correct, Vivek ji.
Yeah.
Member of the Public Accounts Committee.
It is one of the most important committees. The lockdown has brought manufacturing and services to a grinding halt. Both these sectors contribute over 80% of India's GDP. Supply chain disturbances, labor-related issues could aggravate the situation. With practically not much cash supported coming in the stimulus package, it did not address adequately the near absence demand side situation, and as a result, worst ever recession stares us at this juncture. As per RBI, impact of the pandemic is turning out to be more severe than initially anticipated. So we are really passing through an unprecedented crisis, and light at the end of the tunnel is not in sight now. Sir, I know the topic is resilient. Building a new resilient India. But, sir, we would be depriving the audience if you could share some light as of your tenure as a minister. You were a part of Modi 1.0, and today we are seeing Modi 2.0. So if there's any difference in governance since in the previous term and now, and some interesting stuff from the Public Accounts Committee, and as chairman of the Finance Committee, I know you've had some very interesting anecdotes there. So if you could. Although his biodata has been widely circulated among all our members, but in today's scenario, especially in today's webinar, I want to bring to notice three things. Mr. Sinha is a Harvard graduate. He's an investment fund manager, and he had been an active management consultant. All of which we need really, really now in our present life. So with that, over to you, Sunil Via.
Yeah, thank you, friends. Thank you, Sinha ji, for accepting my invitation. And for me, Merchant Chamber is very close to my heart because 20 years back, I was the president. And my grooming as a leader or leading a chamber started from Merchant Chamber. And then, as you know, in 2016-17, I was heading ASSOCHAM. But my grooming was here, so it's very close to me. But I think, friends, we're in a time. Last 2 months, if I look at my last 35 years of work experience, this has been the real journey for me personally, and more particularly if I see for India too. I had the opportunity, what I did in this 2 months was to see two of our serials, Ramayana and Mahabharata, in our Doordarshan and this thing. And there have been so much of learning. And if I see what we are going through, we have everything there. And we see many of things coming back again in this life today. And why am I giving that correlation? That there's a lot we can learn from our old scriptures and how we should manage life and how should we manage our economy and society going forward. I'm sure Sinha ji, with his experience in the Ministry of Finance, also in the previous Modi 1, and a lot of landmark changes had happened, will be able to give much more better perspective. But if I see that this is a time when India can reboot itself, it can reset itself, take this opportunity to reset and reboot. And this is what I've heard every of the speech of our Prime Minister in the last 2 months. And the last one, where he highlighted the 4 L's, which is important: land, labor, liquidity, and laws. I think he has touched the key right points, which is important to transform India and make it a lot more resilient and bring a new India going forward. There's a lot of hidden agenda there. There's a lot of hidden agenda in the statement which is made that we need to make India Atmanirbhar. I think if what is important for us as citizens, whether it is chambers of commerce, whether it is the lawmakers, policymakers, to basically take these hints and see what can we do to make India a different India and reboot India. My perspective is in the last 10 years or so more particularly, India has done a lot of injustice to our own self by the way we have transformed our rules, regulations, policies. That has kind of choked the system, and it is not allowing it to grow to its own potential. So it is a good time to take this opportunity to reboot and reset ourselves to a new India, which will be free from all the rules, laws, regulations which we have brought in from part of the West and brought in within our own system. And that, I think, is one of the key drivers from the economic perspective. Then the potential which India has is enormous. The way India sits today in the world position is very, very strong. Its demography, its people, all the positives are there. You all are aware of it. I would not want to highlight that. But I think the message which I feel is that if at this point of time, if every one of us can reboot ourselves, reset ourselves into a new environment and think afresh, we will be able to come out of this challenge also and come out a lot more stronger and better. But what is required is a determination to make that change. Just the way our freedom fighters fought hard to bring India and transform India and make India independent almost close to 73 years back, 71, 72 years back. So we need to look at that and free ourselves from our own shackles, which we have built in the last decade or so. With this, it will be much better to hear Sinhaji with his experience, global experience and India experience in running and making laws also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunil ji, and thank you very much to Shri Vivek Gupta ji and Shri Rishabh Kothari ji, who are President and Vice President of the Merchant Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It was a very gracious invitation from my good friend Shri Sunil Kanoria ji that led to this webinar, and I want to thank him for that. I want to thank Vivek ji and Rishabh ji for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all and talk to you all at this I think both difficult, but as Sunil ji was pointing out, a very opportune time in India's history. And the very interesting thing that has been happening during the pandemic is that we've had more of a chance to interact, paradoxically, in these smaller groups than we normally would. Because what has happened during the pandemic, as all of us have stayed at home, is that we've started to use these technologies, these video conferencing technologies a lot more. And I think through that, the great benefit has been an opportunity to interact and talk to lots and lots of groups of people, to hear their feedback, they hear their views, and also to be able to provide all of you a perspective how us in government, in parliament, in the Bharatiya Janata Party are thinking about these unprecedented times. So these are very good opportunities to interact, to share views and perspectives, and I'm very grateful that we've been able to set up this opportunity. I would like to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes or so, Vivek ji, Rishabh ji, if that's all right. And then, of course, be happy to take whatever questions you all might have. But as you know, the topic that we have decided on for today's webinar is building a more resilient India. And to really give justice to this topic, I think it's important to touch on three topics. One, why is it important to build a more resilient India? Why do we need resilience? What does resilience actually mean? Second, what does a resilient India get defined as? If you are going to build a more resilient India, what does that exactly mean? So let's get specific on that. And then the third topic that's very important is, once we understand what resilience means and why it's required, then how do we move forward? What are the very practical policies? What are the practical steps that we can take as a country, as individuals, as companies, to be able to build a more resilient India? So those are the three topics that I think are useful to spend some time on, and I'll give you my perspectives and thoughts on those, which are obviously my own personal views. And then thereafter, whatever questions you all have, we can take those. So let me start with the first topic, which is, why do we need to build a more resilient India? And let's recognize that this unprecedented crisis that we are in right now, both a health crisis as well as an economic crisis globally, this is not an India statement, this is a global statement, is a once in a century phenomenon. And the closest analogy that people have to this is what happened during the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, when India and the world went through a global pandemic like this one. As you all know well, that was a pandemic that came in two waves. The first wave early in the summer, spring and early summer, and then another wave that came in the autumn. And it was the second wave that was even more devastating than the first waves. And this happened around the world because this pandemic spread around the world right after World War I. And it was the troops coming back from World War I to India and to many other countries that actually ended up spreading the Spanish flu at that time, the influenza virus at that time. By the way, most people don't realize it, but the influenza virus is with us till this day. It's just that it's become the flu. What has happened is, over time, it has become less lethal, less virulent, and has remained with us. We found some vaccines, but we still don't have a cure for the flu, as you know well. And that is the nature of viruses. And the fact of the matter is that we have had consistently one virus after the other that has been impacting us, whether it was the Spanish flu in 1819, then we had an Asian flu that came afterwards in the 1950s, we had SARS, we had HIV/AIDS, we had Ebola, we had MERS. These are all viruses, most of them being zoonotic viruses, that is, viruses that spread from animals to human beings, that have consistently been afflicting humanity over the last century. But there are certain viruses that become, like the Spanish flu and now the coronavirus, particularly damaging because they exist in a sweet spot where they are both virulent, that means they're lethal, that means they have high mortality rates, but they also spread very quickly because there are a lot of asymptomatic carriers and a lot of people have mild symptoms. With HIV/AIDS, with SARS, with Ebola, with MERS, these viruses, they didn't spread as quickly, and we were able to manage those pandemics because their symptoms were so severe that you could instantly see who is it that had SARS. You could isolate them, you could quarantine them, and then you could prevent it from spreading. Now, the problem with the Spanish flu and the problem with the coronavirus, which is why this is such a once in a century phenomena, is that on the one hand, it does sicken people quite badly, but on the other hand, the vast majority of people have very mild symptoms, so they spread it everywhere. This combination is a very lethal combination. This is a combination that we are now facing after 100 years after the Spanish flu again. This is what we are grappling with right now. As I said, it's an unprecedented, once in a century event. Now, the Spanish flu itself was a very serious event because it was the only decade, that decade of 1910 to 1921 in India, where since recorded censuses started, that population in one decade actually came down. And, some people say between 15 to 20 million people in India died during the Spanish flu. 15 to 20 million people, just think about it. The US has lost about 125,000 people to SARS right now. And about 2 million people in the US have been infected. You know the numbers in India. But just think about the incredible magnitude of the Spanish flu, in which 15 to 20 million Indian people died. Right now, we've lost about 7, 8, 10,000 people. This was 15 to 20 million people. So these are rare events. I want you to understand that these are rare events. They come very, very infrequently, but when they come, they have this incredible impact on both public health as well as the economy because of quarantining and because of having to shut things down. So we are dealing with a very difficult, very complicated set of issues here that are associated with the coronavirus pandemic. Now, even as we are dealing with this particular pandemic, as I said, we've had a series of viruses in the past as well. So we've got multiple situations where these kinds of viruses have impacted us. And that's one set of risks that we are dealing with, which are these pandemics. Another set of risks that we are dealing with, of course, relate to various financial crises. And we've seen that through the dot-com bust of 2001. We've seen that through the global financial crisis, which happened in 2008, 2009. We've seen that in the Asian financial crisis that happened in the mid-1990s. So there are financial panics, financial crashes also that are a big risk that we have to take. Then we've dealt with, in 1989 and 74, 75, with a rapid increase in energy costs because of OPEC and so on. So that has been a major shock to the global economy. Obviously, we are dealing with issues related to terrorism, global terrorism as well. That through 9/11, through 26/11, have been a big shock to the economy as well. And then finally, we know that there are all kinds of disinformation campaigns that various countries wage on other countries. We know that there are cybersecurity threats we have to deal with. So all of these are different risks that keep hitting India. And then we have the biggest risk of all, which is climate change. And here I think Calcutta has really dealt with that, because on the one hand, you've been grappling with the coronavirus pandemic. On the other hand, you had Cyclone Amphan as well, right? So there you have two major risks bearing down on Calcutta at the same time. And we have to build a society, we have to build a country, we have to build a state where you can deal with all these risks that are coming at you and prevent loss of life, loss of economic livelihoods as well. That's the reason why we need to build a more resilient India. We are going to continue to face these different kinds of risks as time goes on. A lot of people have said, and the science seems to bear this out, that the impact of climate change is going to be more and more extreme weather. Bigger and bigger cyclones, as the Bay of Bengal, for example, gets warmer, as sea levels rise and as sea temperatures rise, the energy that a cyclone is pulling off, the power of the cyclone is getting stronger, and that means more extreme cyclones that we're going to have to deal with, more rainfall, more flooding, and so on. So we are going to be dealing with a lot of risks down the road. And to be able to handle these risks, to be able to sustain the ability to recover from these risks, we have to build a more resilient India. We have no choice, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it is terrorism, whether it is financial crises. These shocks are going to keep coming. And we can't put our head in our sands and say, no, it's fine. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to systemically think about this because these are all one-offs. They happen, once in an infrequent time, and therefore there's nothing we need to do at a governance level, at a systemic level to deal with this. So that's really the reason why it's very important for us to build a more resilient India. These shocks are going to continue to come. They have been coming. If we've been not paying attention to them, that is not right. We need to pay attention because there are very grave consequences if we are not ready for it. So that's the real reason why we want to build a more resilient India. And this coronavirus pandemic has brought it to light in a very dramatic and in a very painful and sad and tragic fashion for us. But it is a reality we have to deal with. And that's why more resilient India is so important. A more resilient world is important. As the Honorable Prime Minister said, for the world to be more resilient, India has to be more resilient. After all, we represent 1/6 of humanity. So that's why it is so important for us to take very, very serious note of what is happening, understand the nature of the tail risk that we are facing, and be able to build in and have the governance and the systems that can deal with that. So hopefully you'll understand, by me talking about these various risks, why building a more resilient India is so important. Now, let's ask ourselves a second question. If we want to build a more resilient India, we recognize we are going to face these risks where people are going to suffer tremendous damage, both from a health perspective as well as from an economic perspective. What would a more resilient India look like? जो माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी कहते हैं कि हमें एक आत्मनिर्भर भारत बनाना है, तो कई लोग समझते हैं कि इसमें कि हम लोग सिर्फ स्वदेशी को हम लोग महत्व दे रहे हैं, स्वदेशी को महत्व दे रहे हैं, लेकिन आत्मनिर्भरता का ये मतलब नहीं कि हम लोग एकदम आइसोलेशनिज्म पे आ जाएं। आत्मनिर्भरता का मतलब ये कि भारत जो है वो आत्मनिर्भर होकर जो हमें साधनों की जरूरत है, जो हमें क्षमताओं की जरूरत है, वो हम लोग अपने पास रखें, जिसमें कि हम अपने भाग्य को हम लोग तय कर सकें। यानी द आइडिया ऑफ अ रेजिलिएंट इंडिया is an idea where we can control our destiny. That is the idea of resilience. And so that not any one shock or any one crisis results in a situation where we lose control of our destiny. If you remember, and Vivek ji and Sunil ji will remember this well, that the 1991 liberalization followed an economic crisis of 1990-1991. And what caused that economic crisis? The economic crisis was caused by two external shocks. One, oil prices going up because of the Gulf War of 89-90, and second, one or two drought years that we faced around that time. So that combination of the external shock of oil prices going up, drought happening at the same time, agricultural output going down, suddenly led to a situation where we were very fragile. We were very fragile. And as a result of that, we had to obviously, borrow money from the IMF, and so on. And that really seriously compromised our independence a great deal. So building a more resilient India means building a strong, self-sufficient India that is capable of looking after itself. And if India can look after itself, and India can compete with the world's best and provide goods and services anywhere else in the world, then the world also becomes more resilient. There's a great article in the Indian Express that Shri Sanjeev Sanyalji has written, where he lays out the definition of resilience and Atmanirbharta very well. There are two or three aspects to that definition that are important, that are worth noting, so that nobody has any misconceptions about what Atmanirbharta or resilience means. Number one, as I said also, कि सब साधन हमारे पास होने चाहिए, that we must have the ability, whether it is as far as drugs are concerned, whether it is healthcare, whether it's financial resources, that we can make sure that our growth continues, that we are not like we were in 1991, subject to external lenders to give us the money so that we can continue our growth. So one aspect of resilience, what resilience means is sufficiency in the important critical strategic resources. That's one very important aspect of resilience. The second very important aspect of resilience is the combination of local and global. And the Honorable Prime Minister said that, where he said that our brands, our companies have to become very competitive. They have to be locally successful, but they also have to be plugged into global supply chains. He emphasized that we have to become a part of global supply chains, so that both as far as our local capabilities are concerned, as secondly, as our ability to participate and win in global supply chains are concerned, the local and the global both have to be emphasized to be resilient. We have to be local. Our brands have to be as good as any in the world. We have to be super competitive. That is a very important part of resilience. But equally, the other important part of resilience is that we have to be globally competitive, globally plugged in. And through our exports, through our services, we have to contribute to the world's growth. We have to contribute to the world's prosperity. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is really our thinking. The world is a family. India is an important part of the family. So we have to make sure that India prospers and the world prospers. That's a second aspect of resilience. One, as I said, we have to have the competencies and the resources. The second, we have to participate and be competitive globally. The third aspect of resilience is sustainability. And when I say sustainability, I mean sustainability from the point of view of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason I bring those up is because they are broad-based, they are very all-inclusive, comprehensive. They address many aspects of society, including obviously climate change. They include, of course, public health. They also include important aspects like social justice, gender inequality, diversity, all of these other aspects that make for a vibrant, well-functioning society. All of these are covered in the Sustainable Development Goals. And sustainability for us in the long run, thinking about these SDGs, working towards better health metrics, better emissions, lower emissions, and so on, all those are important as well. So if I had to define an equation and say, what does resilience mean? So I could, as an engineer, I'll say the equation would be resilience equals resourcefulness plus competitiveness plus sustainability. These are the three characteristics, the three attributes of resilience. Resourcefulness, that means we have the resources ourselves in the strategic sectors. Competitiveness, both locally and globally, we are part of supply chains. We can compete globally with the world's best. And sustainability, that means in the long run, we are not using up our natural resources. We are not creating further environmental damage so that we can continue. That, friends, could be a good definition of what resilience means for India. So, as I said, I would touch upon three topics. I've touched on two. Why is it that we need resilience? Because of all the different shocks and unpredictability and uncertainty that we're dealing with. Two, what does resilience mean for India in a way? And this is my definition based on what lots of people have written, including Sri Sanjeev Sanyalji. And number three, I come to my third and final topic, which is, so what are we doing about it? What are the practical things that the government has done? Now, if we think about all the things that the Honorable Prime Minister has been doing and his government have been doing for the last 6 years, you will note that all of these have been contributing towards Atmanirbharta. They have been contributing towards resilience. Whether it is the direct benefit transfer program, Ayushman Bharat, Ujjwala Yojana, Ujala Yojana, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, all of these have been building up our competencies. They've been building up our ability to move towards a more sustainable, more prosperous future. So the vision has been there all along. Each of these steps has been well sequenced. These are steps that are building on each other, that are enabling us to be more able to deal with the global ups and downs. And friends, I'd like to highlight here that it is because of Jan Dhan, it is because of the rollout of Aadhaar, it is because of the growth of the telecom sector, all of which has happened in the last 5 or 6 years, that is resulted in a situation where during this coronavirus pandemic, when we had to transfer 1,500 rupees into Jan Dhan accounts, when we had to transfer 2,000 rupees into the accounts of farmers, 9 crore farmers in India, when it was necessary for us to be able to provide more money for Narega, 1 lakh crores has been now granted for Narega, 202 rupees a day, that we had the whole Narega roster system converted so that people are being paid electronically, digitally into their bank accounts. All of these steps that have been taken, friends, have been steps that have been worked on for the last 6 years. I myself have worked on many of these, including Jan Dhan. And it is because we did that work, today we are able to deal with the coronavirus pandemic the way we have. So that we've been able to provide immediate relief. And a lot of people have said, why isn't there more cash going into people's bank accounts? The reality is that if you look, for example, at farmer families, we have about 25 crore families in India, which about 9 crore families are farmer families. For farmer families, my calculation is that we have in 2 months, 60 days, we have transferred about 10 to 12,000 rupees per average into farmer family bank accounts. Over 1 lakh crores of cash has gone into the bank accounts of these 9 crore people, of which 75,000 crores has gone in as procurement price, obviously for the Rabi crop. So that has gone in. 9,000 crores has gone in through the Fasal Bima Yojana, 6,000 crores, has gone in through the Fasal Bima Yojana for insurance protection. And 19,000 crores has gone in through the Kisan Samman Nidhi. So over 1 lakh crores has gone into the bank accounts of farmer families right away. And so significant cash support has happened that way. By deferring a lot of EMIs, by deferring tax payments and so on, that too has provided cash in people's pockets. All of this is possible because we built the infrastructure, we built the systems to be able to do that. Other ways in which we have provided relief, which is very substantial additional credit to MSME sector, a tremendous amount of money, 3 lakh crores, as you know, has been laid out for MSME credit. We are supporting NBFCs. Sunil ji knows more about it than I do, but we are supporting NBFCs through an SPV. We've created a fund of funds for MSME. All of this is possible because of the reform steps, all of the work that we've done in the past that has enabled us to be able to deal with this. So the important steps that we're taking for resilience are not just now because of the coronavirus pandemic. They have been steps that have been taken over the last 6 years, and now they are being further accelerated through this 20 lakh crore package that has been announced by Honorable Finance Minister through this Atmanirbhar Abhiyan that we are launching right now. So that is what is enabling us in a very practical way to become more resilient. Now, in the Atmanirbhar package, there are 2 or 3 things I want to specially emphasize, and I will end then, and then of course we can go to question and answers. But there are 2 or 3 things I want to specially emphasize. The first very important aspect of this is that this has been a series of sequence steps. You'll see that we provided immediate relief both in terms of cash support as well as in terms of compliance relief right away. So we did that. Then we rolled out a further series of support programs for MSMEs, for corporates as well. RBI, of course, has played a very sort of coordinated and well-sequenced role here as well by bringing down the repo rate, by providing a lot of relief, regulatory relief, and so on. So there's been a well-coordinated, well-sequenced set of steps that have been taken. And at the same time, recognizing the uncertainty and what the problems of the future might be, we have reserved some of our financial capacity for the future as well. So one important point to note about the Atmanirbhar package is that it has been a sequenced and a well thought through package that preserves for us financial flexibility in the future. We have not fired all our bullets at once. We have preserved some ammunition for the future because we have to see how this pandemic develops. So that's one very important aspect to note. The second very important aspect to note is that we have taken some very dramatic reform steps. So this is not just a relief package. This is also a major reform package. The work that's being done in agriculture with respect to the Essential Commodities Act, APMC, contract farming, these are historic measures that have been taken in agriculture that should throw up an agriculture for a lot of innovation and a lot of entrepreneurship. So that's a very important aspect of it. This is a very important reform package. Similarly, the SPV that has been created for NBFCs, the intervention by RBI, these are also very important reform steps for the financial sector that have been undertaken, and the support that we are providing. These are, by the way, unprecedented in RBI history. That these kinds of steps have been taken. The open market operations that the RBI is doing, the kind of support that RBI is providing to various credit markets, these are unprecedented, not happened before. So along with this well-sequenced set of actions, along with relief, massive reform efforts as well. And number three, to just build on what Sunil ji is saying, the Honorable Prime Minister has correctly laid out that land, labor, liquidity, and laws. This is the framework that we're going to continue to pursue as we think about Atmanirbhar Bharat. The government is committed to reform. The government is committed to making India more resilient, more competitive, more sustainable. And as a responsive government, whatever is required to be done in the future, we will continue to do that. Obviously, it has been a very difficult and complicated time dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. As you all know, India took very courageous decisions early on. 536 cases, we came in and we imposed a very tough lockdown. And as a result of that, we are very far ahead of the curve right now, very far ahead of the curve. We've built up our healthcare infrastructure, we've built up our human resources, we've built up all our requirements, PPE kits, ventilators, all of these things. Those are all the things that we have done to prepare for the future. So that's how we are building a more resilient India, and obviously happy to take your questions and answer whatever questions you might have about building a more resilient India. Thank you very, very much.
I thank Jayant Sinha ji for an interesting talk. So we'll begin with the Q&A. So I have some questions. This question is from Mr. Narendra Shah. This is regarding capital markets. He wants to know from you, sir, why is the capital markets rising given the condition of the economy?
There are, I'm sure, many market gurus here, so I will not hazard any guesses on market levels and where markets might be going. The only thing I will say, as somebody who has been a hedge fund manager and an investor for many, many years, is that markets always look to the future. And I think markets, whether it is in the US, in India, or around the world, are actually appreciating the very bold policy steps that governments have taken around the world, and particularly in India as well. Again, if you look, globally and see what India's package looks like, and you look at, relief, you look at reform, you look at size, and the kinds of steps that have been taken in all those measures and all those dimensions, India actually does very, very well for our comparable sort of peer group. We've done extremely well in terms of the size and the scope of the package. So I think markets like what the government is doing. Markets are looking forward to the future. And one thing I didn't mention, but is very clear now from the science and the medical work that's happening, is that within 3 to 6 months, we will have good drugs to control and deal with coronavirus. And there are some 50 or so vaccine trials that are underway just now. It's very clear that by the end of the year or early next year, we will have a successful vaccine. It'll take probably another year to vaccinate the 7 billion people on this planet with this vaccine. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And markets are forward looking, and markets are seeing that there will be a cure in 3 to 6 months, and there will be a vaccine in another 12 months or so. So with that in mind, there is, of course, an expected recovery. There is, of course, a hope that it will be a V-shaped recovery. And when people look at the policies that we have right now, they see that these are policies that are actually pointing to a V-shaped recovery. And I think that's what markets are responding to right now. So that's my best guess as to why we see markets going up.
So the next question is from Mr. Ghanshyam Saraf. His question is, do you think that resources available to Indian industry are competitive enough with global standards so that they can compete both locally and globally?
That's a great question, Vivekji, and the answer is it depends on the industry. Certain industries, as we know, whether it's IT services, gems and jewelry, pharmaceuticals, textiles, many industries now are extremely globally competitive. And when we look at their factor costs, when we look at their input costs, we find that those are extremely competitive. Otherwise, we wouldn't have built a $100 billion IT services industry if it was not globally competitive. We wouldn't have built a small auto, sort of manufacturing ecosystem in India where we are exporting both cars and two-wheelers around the world if we were not competitive. Recently, if you look at mobile phones, some 60-70% of, I believe, mobile phones are now being manufactured in India. And that's been done because India has taken very, very thorough steps. And I will thank Shri Ravi Shankar Prasad ji and Shri Piyush Goyal ji, and of course all their colleagues, for really having gone through in a very granular way and understood what it would take to bring electronics manufacturing to India. And they've actually done that. In the last 5 or 6 years, they've done that. Now, if India was not competitive in electronics manufacturing, in smartphone manufacturing, your smartphone would still be made in China or in Vietnam. Instead, it's being made in India now. Why? It's because we are globally competitive. So there are many industries where we become globally competitive, where we are a strong exporter, but there are still other industries where we have to work step by step to reduce our input costs, reduce some of the regulations, some of the barriers to further growth. And there again, industries are working in many, many cases with government in a very practical, proactive way to address those regulatory barriers, to address those factor costs, and to make India more competitive. And I'll just conclude on that by saying the Honorable Prime Minister has said that very clearly. The Honorable Finance Minister has said that very clearly. We want to be integrated in global supply chains. We want to be competitive. So industry should come forward in a practical and in a realistic manner to ask us what is it that's required. Remember, we've slashed corporate taxes in India. We now have among the lowest corporate taxes in India. That was previously a very big complaint that people had, is that corporate taxes in India were in the 35-36% range, which were much too high. Now they're down to the 21-22% range. And that makes them very competitive globally. So wherever we can find those opportunities, those are the areas that we can start working on.
Thank you for, I think I'll just read this out, but I think your answer already covers this question. How ready is India to take advantage of these changes happening in global supply chain? I think you covered it. Sir, before we go for live questions, there is just one more from Mr. Harsh Sharma. Sir, do you agree with the 1991 policy and its decisions?
Absolutely. I think we are all the beneficiaries of that. Friends, I went to IIT in 1980 and I graduated in 1985. That seems almost prehistory now. I'm 57 years old. But I can assure you in 1985, when we graduated from IIT, any of us that wanted to get an ability to understand global business or understand how the world did science or did research, we had to leave India. There was no question of staying in India in 1985 if you wanted a global world-class education. And it was liberalization in 1991 that removed a lot of these trade barriers, that removed a lot of restrictions as far as India is concerned, and enabled India to become much more open, much more better integrated with the global economy. And I can tell you that while in 1980-85, our thinking for all of us in the IITs was to go to the US. Today, for kids who are graduating from the IITs or other good institutions, other good universities, very few of them now are going overseas. And I've asked this because I'm very closely, of course, associated with IIT Delhi, which is where I went. In my class, maybe 60 or 70% of the students went to the US. Today, maybe 10 or 20% are going to the US. And these are the changes that liberalization has wrought. We've obviously gone from an economy that was probably, I don't know what the number was, 200 or 300 billion in 1991 to 3 trillion today. So the economy has grown 10 times in these 30 years. So it's been, not just life-changing for, us and our careers. It's also brought prosperity and growth to India. So I think absolutely necessary reforms, and we need to keep on doing reforms. Reforms are an iterative, dynamic process because the world around us is changing. Countries around us are changing. And so we need to take into account what is required at any given time for Indians and India to be competitive.
Thank you, sir. Rishabh, can you get Rajesh Nath? He'll be our first live question. He'll be the first person to ask a live question. Rajesh Nath.
Yeah, good evening, Rajesh Nath here. My question was, sir, I represent the German Engineering Federation. Now, in Germany, they have, the government has taken the step, they call it the Kurzarbeitergeld, where they are transferring money directly to the companies. So the company, for example, can employ the people for only 60% of the time or 40% of the time. So the remaining 60% is being supported directly by the government. So in our case, we have had the stimulus package for the MSME, but would direct credit to the MSMEs to help them sustain the salaries of their workforce, would that not have been a simpler way to tide over this crisis?
Rajeshji, that is a matter that has been discussed at great length in government, in policy circles, and of course in the media as well, which is what is the best way of supporting MSMEs and corporates through this difficult period. The decision that was made is to be able to provide ample liquidity, ample credit. In fact, as you know, there was an automatic increase in credit limits and so on for MSMEs, as well as an effort to provide significant and ample liquidity so that our MSMEs could borrow whatever was required to be able to support their workforce, support their operations, and very quickly get past the lockdown and resume their normal operating activities. So taking everything into account, given the fact that our fiscal resources are far more limited when you compare them to a Germany or you compare them to a US, after all, the US has, as is famously said, the exorbitant privilege, right? You must have read about this, the exorbitant privilege of having the world's reserve currency, which means they can basically print unlimited money. So the US can print unlimited money, and so they printed unlimited money and given trillions of dollars. They've just thrown it at everybody and anyone. And obviously that has been very unique in terms of the US response. But Germany, of course, has been, as you probably know, a country that's been running a fiscal surplus. So as per their budget, they have to run a fiscal surplus every year to keep their fisc in balance. Obviously, when we look at India's fiscal deficit, our fiscal deficit is much higher. We have to take into account our external balances, the rupee, the external account, all of these issues. And so it was important for us to be somewhat more prudent than Germany could be. And therefore, I think a very well thought out, well considered decision has been made, which takes into account the credit and liquidity requirements of MSMEs and corporates, and also takes into account how rapidly we can resume normal economic activity, which is what we are largely doing. So if it's a matter of 2 or 3 or 4 months, by providing compliance support, providing moratoriums, providing deferment of tax payments, as well as providing credit. Thinking, has been that over these 3, 4, 5 months, this is sufficient support so that people can resume normal economic activities.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Our next question is Mr. Brij Mohan Beriwal.
Good evening, Mr. Jayantji. I have 2-3 questions. Should I ask simultaneously, or one by one, or all together at once?
ब्रिज मोहन जी एक साथ पूछ लीजिए.
Okay.
अब थोड़ा शॉर्ट और काफी लोग क्वेश्चन पूछना चाह रहे हैं.
ये already इसमें दिया हुआ distribution of freebies may be necessary for sustainability, but can it make India resilient or Atmanirbhar? My second is Modi ji has done marvelous work like Jan Dhan, housing, electricity, gas, toilet, DBT, etc. for downtrodden, even more than Vajpayee ji's government. But why unemployment, dearth of demand is there, whereas in Vajpayee ji's regime, retention, not unemployment, supply, not demand were problems. A famous ad, if you remember, Hari Sadhu regarding throwing away job was popular at that time on the air because unemployment was not the problem at that time. Second, the prices of properties have substantially gone down, but not the circle rates. Sometimes they are multi times more than the price of the properties. Buyers have
I think we lost Brij.
Lost him. Rishabh Mahesh ji.
Good evening, sir. Rather, good morning.
I am sorry, it was muted.
Okay.
The prices of properties have substantially gone down, but not the circle rates. Sometimes they are multi times more than the price.
So, Brij Mohan ji, let me answer your
Buyers
three
has to pay
questions.
stamp duty on circle rates. Buyer and seller both end up paying deemed income tax. How the deal will happen, or without deal, how demand will be generated?
So,
My
Brij Mohan
third
ji,
question is, can individual income tax can be designed on the basis of dependents like ration card? It will relieve an individual supporting a joint family from tax nightmare. These are my questions. Thank you for giving me patience hearing.
Thank you very much, Brij Mohan ji. Let me try and answer your three very profound questions you've asked. They're complicated questions. So I'll try and do them justice as quickly as I can. With respect to your first question about support being provided to vulnerable sections, I think we should refrain from using terms like freebies. Because when you use a word like freebie, it sounds like you're doing somebody a favor. I don't agree with that. As a Lok Sabha member representing 25 lakh people and somebody who deals on a day-to-day basis with people who are very vulnerable, who are very needy on a continuous basis, I think it is the responsibility of every civilized society to support those who are needy, those who are vulnerable. जो जरूरतमंद लोग हैं, उन लोगों को हमें सहयोग देना, ये हमारी जिम्मेवारी है. हर सभ्यता को, हर समाज को ये करना जरूरी है. तो एक सेफ्टी नेट बनाना जरूरी है, एक गरीबों के लिए कवच बनाना जरूरी है. तो अगर हम इसे कवच के तौर पे देखें, एक सेफ्टी नेट के तौर पे देखें, तो फिर हम लोग समझेंगे कि हमारी जिम्मेवारी बनती है कि किस तरीके से, किस प्रकार से हम लोग ये सहयोग और समर्थन दे सकें. So we have to recognize that every civilized society on this planet supports people through wide-ranging safety nets, whether there is free healthcare, free education, whether it is unemployment assistance. There is a whole range of welfare benefits that are provided in every civilized society so that we can support the more vulnerable and needy sections of society. So I think if you look at it in that regard, then you yourself said Honorable Prime Minister's government has done a wonderful job in building a robust safety net. And that's, by the way, a very important aspect of resilience, is that we have a robust safety net so that people, when they're vulnerable and when they need help, we can provide them the assistance. And that's what Jan Dhan and Aadhaar and mobile, the whole JAM Trinity, DBT have done for us. So I think it's a wonderful thing that's been done. It's a historic thing that's been done. And, people for generations will remember how well this robust safety net was created. Your second question, Brij Mohanji, was about unemployment. And as far as unemployment is concerned, we have to, of course, take the pandemic period and set it aside because this is, as I said, an unprecedented crisis. Obviously, unemployment has gone up in countries like America and elsewhere during the pandemic because that's bound to happen. But what we have to take into account are the very important reform steps and the steps that have been taken to strengthen and make our economy more competitive and better, which previously had been resulting in accelerating economic growth. All the high frequency indicators coming into the pandemic were looking very positive. The economy was accelerating, momentum was building, jobs were being created. And as soon as the pandemic is dealt with and under control, I'm sure we will have a V-shaped recovery. And again, the same economic momentum we had prior to the pandemic will resume, particularly with the important reform steps that have been undertaken. Then you had a question about real estate circle rates and the impact this has on taxes. Those are decisions that every state government has to make about land prices, circle rates, etc. And so obviously, whether it's the Calcutta Municipal Corporation or the state of West Bengal, I think they need to think about circle rates and whether those circle rates reflect market realities or not. And then you had a final question on income tax, which frankly, I didn't quite understand exactly what you meant by a joint family there. But as far as income tax in India is concerned, we have fairly low rates, relatively speaking, globally speaking. And the whole income tax system has been streamlined, simplified, and made much easier. The vast majority of people are filing online and getting the refunds online. So it's become a lot more convenient. You have to deal with the income tax officer only electronically right now. So we've taken a number of very important reform steps to make income tax payment a lot more streamlined and a lot easier for everybody. Thank you.
Mahesh Kayalji, Rishabh, Mahesh ji.
Yeah. So we welcome the support to MSME sector in terms of the loan through banks. MSME contributes significantly to the economy. But at the same time, sir, the non-SME sector, which contributes more larger to the economy, has been completely ignored. This sector is also suffering the same what the MSME is facing. Larger the size, the problems are also larger. We expect that at least the 20% loan to the non-SME sector should have also be given, at least to the companies which have got a proven track record, and the performance is also satisfactory, so that they can perform, contribute to the economy and ensure their sustainability. Today, sir, the banks are so shaky, even having the surplus funds and to the accounts which are going very strong and there is nothing, not a single default, still there they are not willing to give even 5% of the announcement, because they are apprehending that anything can go bad the next morning. So they are so much in a shaky condition, they don't want to do anything, rather preferring to put the money back to the RBI under the reverse repo at 3 or 3.5%.
So Maheshji, obviously what you're alluding to are corporates because MSMEs go up to now, I think the number is 300 crores, Sunilji, is it 300? 200, 250. So MSMEs go up to 250 crores, which I think covers the vast majority of companies, enterprises in India. There are then, the larger corporates that are 250 crores and up that are also, I think, in need of funding and credit. And here, the support that we are providing the banks and the NBFCs hopefully should enable liquidity to flow through to our larger corporates. And many of these larger corporates have, in fact, raised money through the bond markets and through public sector banks. So at least to my knowledge, credit markets have started to move again and people are getting financing. But the best tonic, the best answer to all the concerns and questions that bankers might have about revenue and about your profit margins and so on is to get the economy restarted again. Because if the economy is restarted again, then the concerns that people have about revenue certainty, whether you're going to be able to generate revenues, whether you're going to be able to generate profits and cash flow and service your loans, those questions will be addressed. And I think that's really what we are focused on right now through Unlock 1.0 and all the further actions that the government has been taking, so that we can resume normal economic activity, obviously following all of the important measures that are required: social distancing, masks, hand washing, all of those things. But again, around the world, you will see that every country is now rushing to resume normal economic activity, because we have to remove this uncertainty about revenues, about cash flow, about profit margins. And once that uncertainty is removed, then if banks are being reluctant to lend, I think they'll start to feel a lot more comfortable lending, because revenue growth will resume and profits and cash flow will start coming in again.
Thank you, Rishabh. Can we go to the next questioner, please? Puneet ji had two questions about judicial reforms and universal basic income. Puneet ji. Rishabh, can you unmute him?
I've asked him to unmute. I can't unmute him myself.
I think
Sorry. Sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was listening to the conversation. Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate the handling of the current situation. The decision making has been really wonderful. Sir, I have a few observations as a student of business. Judicial reforms, because our contract systems are very weak. So I think that is fundamental block to working of the insurance industry. And some parts, maybe banking industry also. So what can we do to reform the insurance industry? Maybe do something like what has been done in telecom and aviation, so that the reach of insurance industry. And
No,
secondly, the second question was about universal basic income. That because smart manufacturing is the new order. And if one has to be globally competitive, it has to be very, very automated manufacturing processes now. So can this go hand in hand, adoption of smart manufacturing and adoption of universal basic income?
Yeah, Puneet, you asked two important questions with respect to judicial reform, particularly in the insurance sector. We have a long way to go before we get to very, very world-class, world-leading practices there. And again, it's, as I've said, a continuous, iterative, dynamic process. If there are specific areas there, because insurance obviously falls within the purview of the Standing Committee of Finance, if there are some specific reforms, there are specific regulations that you think need to be modified or need to be improved upon, or if there are any other suggestions you have around more resources, more benches for the NCLT or more judges, whatever your thoughts might be, if you can send me an email as chair of the Standing Committee on Finance, I will certainly take that up and see what might be possible. So please do send it to me in writing, what your specific suggestions are, and we will consider that. Now let's come to your second question about universal basic income. We have to create a robust safety net for our people. Particularly vulnerable sections of society, farmers that are dependent on rain-fed agriculture, that have small land holdings or are landless peasants, the elderly, the differently abled. There are a whole group of vulnerable sections of society that we have, and we have to make sure that we provide them the support that they require. Additionally, we have to make sure that particularly in rural areas, if people want work, they can get work, and we're doing that through NREGA. So there are a variety of schemes that have been created to provide support to vulnerable sections. And those provide a robust safety net. Now, is universal basic income something that can substitute for all of these? That's a very good discussion that I think we should continue to have as a society. There are significant and difficult transitional aspects to it, because you'll have to, move from one set of programs to another set of programs. So the transition is not an easy transition; it's a difficult transition. Recognize also that both the center and the states have a role to play. So both necessarily have to be part of all of this. And I'll conclude on universal basic income by saying that many elements of this are already in place, as I said, through NREGA and through the Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is sending 6,000 rupees to farmer families and is already doing that. And on top of that, as you know, many states have their own version of farmer support programs for girls, for elderly, for differently abled people. So there's a whole range of support programs, and we have to look at all of these comprehensively and ask ourselves, are we providing enough support to people as they may require? The answer obviously is we can do more, but what the exact direction should be, whether we should continue to run multiple programs or whether we should move to one single universal basic income, is something that I think society needs to debate and engage in, and we need to see what the practical approaches to this might be.
Jayanji, we are just moving towards our last questions. Last one or two, three questions. Surendra Kayalji. Rishabh Surendra Kayal. Surendra Kayalji.
Good evening, sir. My question is that the government has given a lot of relief packages to support MSME sector and other industrial houses or the trading community or the weaker section of the society. But the trading community, which is the backbone of the entire distribution system, has been left out. They are also enjoying the credit facilities from the bank. But in this pandemic, they don't have any resources to support themselves or continue their business. So this is the need of the hour, that the handholding to the trading community by the government should be considered, and the 20% automatic loans mechanism for MSME, which has been considered, should be considered for the trading community also. That's my.
Surendraji, this is a request that has come in. I've had some meetings with the Indian Retailer Association, and they were telling me that retailers and the trade, in effect, are not covered under the MSME framework. And I suggested to them that they write to Shri Nitin Gadkari ji, who's the MSME minister, and request through representations that the trade as well as retailers be included in the MSME, because obviously, as you correctly point out, they play an extremely important role in our economy, and they should definitely be considered within this MSME framework. So my suggestion would be that you send representations and seek a meeting with the Honorable Minister and see whether he can advance this so that the benefits that are coming to MSME come to traders, to retailers as well.
Thank you, sir. Vishal Bhaiya, sir, Vishal Hajaria is the immediate past president. So now we are moving only towards the presidential questions. So Vishal Bhaiya, over to you.
So my question is related to the question which we have just asked regarding MSME funding and the other funding. So the government has allocated 3 lakh crore for this funding. Do you think this is adequate? And when this money runs out, what happens to the others who have not got this funding for a 20% in MSME also and the other funding also?
Vishal Bhaiya, if you allow me, I want to add. Sir, we were told by the Honorable Finance Minister this 3 lakh crores is not only for MSME, but for all businesses. So I just thought that is in perspective out here.
Okay. So there may be further further refinements to that 3 lakh crore number. But again, please note that the government has said all along that whatever is necessary with respect to providing liquidity, providing credit, the government will be prepared to do. And we also know that as far as the amount of funds that banks are parking with RBI right now on the reverse repo, those funds are 8 or 9 lakh crores. So there is no shortage of liquidity as long as banks are comfortable taking credit risk and underwriting credit. You will be able to get that credit and have that credit be available to you. And I also think we must recognize and applaud what RBI is doing to stabilize credit markets and enable credit markets to clear smoothly by providing, banks and NBFCs with support and so that they can buy corporate bonds, etc. And also creating SPVs so that those SPVs can take NBFC paper as well as corporate paper as well. So all of these steps have been taken to ensure that there is a steady and sufficient flow of credit to corporates. Now, obviously, when I mention this, so we have to really understand it in terms of credit markets. I want to get a little theoretical here, because what I find, and again, Standing Committee on Finance, I have to look into all the different aspects of this. But what I often find is that people use terms interchangeably and wrongly sometimes. Everybody uses the term liquidity. I want liquidity. Well, what is liquidity? Is liquidity cash in the bank? Is liquidity credit flow from a bank to you? Is liquidity, profits that you're generating? What exactly is liquidity? Now, when people talk about liquidity in that fashion, I find that 80-90% of the time, what they're really saying is they want credit from the banks. That's what when they say, I want liquidity, what they're meaning is, I want to go to a bank and I want to borrow. Now, that is credit. And when a bank gives you credit, it's taking depositor money, which is your money that you're putting into the bank. They're going through an underwriting function where they're deciding what your credit risk is and how to price that credit risk. And then they provide you credit. You all as business people and entrepreneurs and traders know that extremely well. That's how credit practices work. Sunil ji, of course, provides credit all the time. So he knows exactly how this whole process works. So when we have to provide credit, we have to understand what is the credit risk that we are underwriting and how to price that risk. The challenge we've had through the coronavirus pandemic is that because of the massive uncertainty associated with what's going to happen to economic activity, it's become very difficult for those who supply credit, the providers of credit, the banks and the NBFCs, to figure out what the credit risk actually is. Are you going to be at 80% of your revenues, normal revenues of last year? Are you going to be at 60%? Are you going to be 110%? Nobody really knows. So how do I assess and price credit risk? And when I can't assess and price credit risk, credit markets, which is the market between those who are supplying credit and those who are demanding credit, those markets freeze up. Those markets don't clear because it's impossible to assess that risk, and that uncertainty is very high. So what the government and what RBI have done, please understand it, is to ensure that credit markets are clearing smoothly, are operating smoothly. One, we're trying to resume economic activity as quickly as possible so that your revenues again seem to be based on historic precedents and are much more stable than they were earlier. Wherever banks have had not enough money to be able to lend, we've provided that. And of course, as I said, they've got massive amounts of liquidity deposit money that's sitting there that can be lent out. So there's no shortage of depositor money that's available right now. And of course, we have been providing support of various kinds in terms of reducing risk by creating these SPVs, by having RBI engage in open market operations to enable risk to come down. And finally, with RBI cutting the repo rate, cutting the reverse repo rate and so on, we are making it much more attractive to banks, for banks to lend. So these are all actions that have been taken to ensure that credit markets work well. When you go to your banker and say, please give me a loan, then that person can assess your revenue and your cash flows, that they can get ample liquidity, ample depositor money, and then they can give you a loan. So that's what we have done. Now, beyond that, it's very difficult for a government to do more, because if you're doing that, then you are not letting the financial system work properly. And the job of the financial system is intermediation, which is taking money from depositors and giving it to borrowers. If the borrower is not somebody that you can give money to in a prudent way, then no banker is ever going to give money. Sunil ji and others as NBFCs and so on, I'll not give money if they can't price your risk and know that the money is going to come back. So our job is to make sure the credit markets work. After that, then it is for the various agents who are operating in the credit market, the various stakeholders, the various actors who are there to enable these markets to work well. So if there are some systemic issues, if there's some systemic barriers, whether it's interest rates, liquidity available to banks, whether it is policies of RBI, if there are systemic interventions that are possible, let us know. But as far as we can see, we have tried to come in and do whatever we can to support credit markets. Sorry for that long answer, but it's important that we make sure that credit markets work well, risk is priced properly, and the borrowers who are legitimate and good borrowers get the money at the right price. That's what we need to do. And I think all the steps that we have taken are intended to do that. But if there are more steps that we can take, more changes that we can make, we are obviously open and eager to hear from you all.
Thank you, sir.
So the last question, and also for a very brief remarks, Sunil Kanodia ji, our past president.
Thank you. Sunilji, I think you explained all the issues well, but one of the key challenges which I see, especially what I've observed in the last 2 months, there's been a lot of positive intent, but the implementation, when you get to see the rules and regulations which comes out, it nullifies the intent. I'll give an example, like when you called about the NBFC, not a single rupee in the last 2.5 months has flown to the system. Because what happens, when the regulators or the policymakers, when they make the detailed rules, the banks are giving money in one hand and taking it away from the back hand, saying that we'll give you under the LTRO, but you have to reduce your exposure. So you don't get any money. It is just that their exposure comes down. Similarly, we have been talking with a lot of the MSME companies. We have almost about 35,000 MSME companies whom we finance. So we were thinking of working out some solutions with them, and we went to banks to get the back end, because as an NBFC, we have to get the same support. But you don't see that, because they said, okay, we'll give you, provided you give me back. So they are getting a government guarantee on an exposure which they had without actually giving me that resource. So I think there is a major mismatch in the intent and the implementation, and that is very important to get that corrected. The regulator and the policymaker needs to see that what is on the ground getting implemented. Giving an example, 1.5 years back, the government had come out with the partial guarantee scheme to the NBFC sector. 1 lakh crore was earmarked. Only 10,000 crore could be utilized. 90,000 could not be. Why? It was not that the demand was not there, because the rules were such that when you filter it, it doesn't fall through. The same here, I can assure that this 3 lakh crore which has been earmarked, it will not be effective, because the way the rules have been designed, we have taken almost about 10 days trying to understand the rules and regulations, how it can be implemented to our customers. So it's very difficult, and that's where, as I was saying, the laws and the policies need to get corrected. Other thing which is important is, say for example, the RBI has come out with the 6-month moratorium. That is not going to solve the problem. The cash flows have got impacted. So you need to allow one-time restructuring of all loans without classifying as an NPA. It's such a simple solution. Because with this pandemic, people have completely, all your assumptions have gone wrong. You have to review the assessment of each credit and look at that. And that is what we have to do to support the client. Otherwise, he will be put as an NPA, put in the acrylic, he will be an untouchable in society. So I think there are some of the things, when we do an implementation in the country, that is where we need to reboot and change ourselves. Thank you.
Akash, sir, would you like to respond, or should we go for vote of thanks?
No, I think Sunilji is bringing up excellent points. And, in all of these situations where policy implementation can be improved and refined, it's very important, as Sunilji is also pointing out, to get down to the exact details, figure out where the language is resulting in unexpected problems, unexpected issues, and really suggest and propose different language, different approaches that can actually make these schemes work much better. So I would request Sunilji to send it to us in writing, which is, what is the text right now? What is the regulation right now? What's working and not working? And then what are the proposed solutions? How would you actually change this language to make it work better in real life? So that's what we need as input from industry, because you have to apply it, you have to make it work. And so please, from an industry association perspective, if you can provide us that input, that would be very valuable.
Thank you, sir. I think it was a very engaging session. A lot of question asked. We've crossed 1 hour 15 minutes. Sir, we've taken up more than we asked for, but I hope you don't mind. And with this, I'll hand it over to my senior vice president, my incumbent president, Akash, for a vote of remarks, for vote of thanks.
It's a great privilege and honor for me to propose a hearty vote of thanks on behalf of Merchants Chamber of Commerce and Industry to Shri Jayant Sinha, Honorable Member of Parliament and Chairperson for Standing Committee on Finance, Government of India. Sir, listening to your analytical approach and in-depth assessment of how we can build A Resilient India was enlightening, and we are grateful for your time. I think it is the right time for all of us to introspect and find our opportunity in this adversity. We are very hopeful that India will reboot and restart itself with an upgraded hardware and software. We shall overcome. I thank all our distinguished guests and participants for attending this webinar. With these words, I offer a hearty vote of thanks to Sri Jayant Sinha for this enlightening address and request all of us to carry it with acclamation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.